Welcome to the Explainer. Have you ever received a gift that, on paper looks absolutely perfect, but for some reason the second you hold it, you just feel instantly weighed down? Well, let's dive into this. Today we're exploring a fascinating concept presented by the YouTube channel Faith Unmasked in a piece called 6 Gifts You Must Never Accept from Anyone. The core premise we're unpacking today is honestly incredibly thought-provoking. Not every open hand is a blessing, and not every gift is innocent. Actually, the source material argues that some seemingly generous offerings can act like hidden burdens that totally disrupt your peace and your sense of identity. Let's look at exactly how they break this down.
To really get this perspective, we have to look at the foundation the source uses. They root their whole argument in a biblical framework, specifically 1 Thessalonians 5:21, which says, "Test all things, hold fast what is good." Now, according to the source, this verse isn't just some piece of ancient advice. It's a mandate to set up a strict protective filter for your life. And the argument here isn't that believers should walk around in a state of constant paranoia, side-eyeing everyone. Not at all. Instead, it's about living with sharp, active discernment. The big idea is that whatever you allow into your physical space, your home, or your daily environment, it can actually shape your internal state way more deeply than you might realize at first glance.
So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the hook, the illusion of gifts. Then we'll run through 3 main filters. Filter 1 is spiritual contamination. Filter 2 is emotional anchors. And filter 3 is ethical traps. And finally, we'll land on the virtue of rejection. Okay, moving right into filter 1, spiritual contamination. Here, the source lays down some very specific rules regarding physical objects. They argue that objects intentionally used in occult practices, witchcraft, or the worship of other gods, they aren't just neutral, harmless decorations. Instead, they're viewed as literal symbols of spiritual allegiance. Drawing heavily on texts like Deuteronomy 7, which commands the destruction of certain carved images to protect the home, the source frames this as a literal manual for territorial protection in the spiritual realm. They also point to the historical account in Acts 19, where early converts in Ephesus publicly burned their magic books. They definitely didn't keep them around for their historical value or, try to sell them. The underlying logic presented here is really striking. You simply cannot hold on to symbols of darkness and still expect to walk fully in the light. So the crucial question is, what do you actually do if you happen to inherit something like this? Well, the source is remarkably pragmatic about it. The procedure they present isn't complicated, but man, it is decisive. Step 1, take a trash bag. Step 2, put the dark inheritances inside. Step 3, quietly get rid of them. The presentation makes a really strong case against keeping objects like old family relics, jewelry, or amulets tied to spiritism purely out of sentimentality. The argument is basically that honoring a family member's memory shouldn't require you to preserve their spiritual confusion. Protecting the spiritual atmosphere of your home, and by extension the future of your kids, takes absolute precedence over holding on to an inherited antique. Period.
Next up, filter 2, emotional and internal anchors.
Now the source shifts gears to focus on things that seem totally normal but secretly steal your internal peace or keep you chained to past trauma. Just imagine a business opportunity, a gift, or an invitation. On the outside, it looks perfectly fine. It's generous, it's logical, it's completely harmless. But on the inside, there's this unexplainable sinking heaviness. There's no visible red flag, no logical reason to say no, and yet your spirit feels completely unsettled. Well, the source argues that this discomfort is absolutely not just a random coincidence. It's actually a profound internal warning that something is seriously amiss beneath the surface of the offer.
Now, what's really fascinating about this is the linguistic analogy the source uses to explain that internal heaviness. They point to Colossians 3:15, which says, "Let the peace of God rule in your hearts." But when they dig into the original Greek text, the word for rule literally translates to acting as an umpire or a referee. Just think about that for a second. Peace is your internal referee blowing the whistle to tell you if a decision is safe or if you're stepping totally out of bounds. The source strongly cautions against ignoring this referee just to avoid an awkward social interaction or to keep from looking rude. They argue that if the referee calls a foul, you have got to listen. This emotional filter also applies to things we've already accepted but really need to let go of. The source uses this striking phrase, museums of failure. These are objects that essentially act as anchors to emotional pain. It could be a box of letters from a highly toxic relationship that destroyed your self-esteem, or maybe a piece of jewelry given to you by a manipulative ex, and let's be real, we all have that one ex. The source references Philippians 3:13, which is the command to forget what is behind and reach forward.
Their whole argument is that to experience a deep mental cleansing, you often need a literal physical cleansing of your environment. If looking at an object instantly transports you back to a season of depression, anxiety, or shame, it simply does not deserve a place on your shelf.
Moving on to filter 3, ethical traps.
This is where the source tackles the danger of gifts funded by corruption or bribes cleverly disguised as generosity. It really forces a massive choice. Are you going to enjoy a temporary benefit, or are you going to preserve your long-term integrity? The source doesn't mince words here. If you know a luxury item, a sum of money, or a lavish gift was obtained through fraud, exploitation, or theft, they argue you absolutely must refuse it. To illustrate the hidden cost of dirty money, the source brings up the biblical story of Achan from the book of Joshua. He coveted and hid forbidden Babylonian wealth in his tent, and that decision brought ruin to his entire community. The core argument is that even if you didn't commit the fraud yourself, willingly benefiting from it makes you a spiritual accomplice. A clear conscience is infinitely more valuable than abundance tied to future ruin.
What good will it be to gain the whole world, yet forfeit your soul? Let that sink in for a moment. The source uses this famous verse from Matthew to confront the reality of favors that come with major strings attached. We're talking about the gifts that aren't really gifts at all, they're hooks. It's the promotion that demands your silence in the face of injustice, or it's the financial opportunity that requires you to twist the truth or lower your moral standards.
The tactic being warned about here is incredibly subtle. You see, you're rarely tempted with something obviously horrible. Instead, you're tempted with the exact thing you deeply desire, but the price tag is your integrity. The source draws a really interesting parallel to the story of Jesus in Matthew 4, where he's offered all the kingdoms of the world, but only if he compromises his allegiance. He rejects it immediately. The big takeaway here is that your divine calling, your peace of mind, and your soul are worth far, far more than temporary convenience or gaining access to powerful circles.
And finally, the virtue of rejection.
This brings us to a total reframe of how we view saying no. The source concludes that knowing how to reject something isn't a sign of rudeness. It's actually a vital protective boundary. Accepting everything offered to you isn't humility. Often, it's just a lack of boundaries. When you establish these 3 filters, screening for spiritual contamination, emotional anchors, and ethical traps, the payoffs are massive. You cultivate a much purer environment, you maintain a totally freer mind, and you foster a more powerful, unhindered walk with your faith. Because as the source notes, true blessings are meant to enrich you and add absolutely no sorrow. So I want to leave you with this final powerful question to really reflect on today. Based on everything we've just unpacked from this framework, what is sitting in your home right now that you need to be separated from in order to elevate your purpose? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I highly encourage you to take a look around your own space today, listen closely, and see what your internal referee has to say.